Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan. Oh, thanks. So today, I am going to talk about React Native key learnings. Really quickly, who am I? I am a software engineer here at Convoy. I am lucky enough to be one of the few founding engineers. There were five founding engineers, including myself. Dan, the CEO, and Grant, the CTO. But my story with Convoy actually goes back almost 7 years, when I worked at a company called Wavy. When I worked at Wavy, I was working there with a guy named Ian, who's also in the audience. Hello, Ian. And Dan. And I believe Dan at that time was head of product or very influential with the product. And so that's where I got to interact with him for the first time. And we were at Wavy, we were working on mobile stuff. Wavy did well. Wavy got acquired by Google. And when I joined Google, I was able to continue working on mobile. At some point in time, near the end of my tenure at Google, I got a phone call, and on the dialer it said Dan Lewis, and I was like, oh, I know what's about to happen. And so I pick up the phone and I go, hello Dan, how's it going? And he reached out to me, and we sat down and we started talking, and almost immediately I knew that it was going to be a startup of some kind, and I wasn't sure what it was. And so he sat down and said, hey, so I'm kind of done with where I'm at. I want to do a startup. And I said, yes. He's like, I didn't even tell you what the startup was. And I said, okay, fair enough. Well, what is the idea? And he says, it's going to be about trucking. And I was like, oh, what? Trucking? I was like, okay, you lost me. I don't really follow that. Me, being a prestigious mobile engineer, wanted to work on anything sexy, so all of the nice UI, and my first impression was like, that's not trucking. But he said, no, just listen to me, and he gave me the pitch that we heard earlier today about how massive the market size was and how big the opportunity was, and nobody was tackling it. And I was like, whoa, okay, I think I like that. That's pretty cool. So that's when I joined Convoy, and we started working on mobile. This was one of the first bug bashing sessions that we had when we were working on our mobile app. And so really early on, when we were building out the app, the full team, all 7 of us, were focused on building the API and the shipper side of things, and we actually hired a contractor to do the Android side of the house. And so the contractor was fully working on native Android. He was cranking away at this, and that was just after we did our seed round. And so fast forward a little bit of time, we're working out the kinks. Sometimes the kinks were harder than others. This is one of our software engineers just noping out and was like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. This hurts my brain. And so so at some point in time, Dan came up to me and he said, hey, listen, seed round was great. That was a lot of fun. We got an Android app out the door. In preparation for our Series A, I'm building the deck, and I'm trying to work on what we should be focusing on. Inside the deck, I said that we built an iOS app, and I said we launched it and it was really successful. And I said, did you now? Because I kind of see a problem with that. Dan, we don't have an iOS app. And he said, yeah, about that. What are you doing in the next 2 months? And I was like, okay, well, I guess this is what I'm doing. And so Ian McLeod and I, we pretty much just locked ourselves in a room, and we said, okay, we won't come out until we've got a mobile app. And at that point in time, we had a decision to make. How do we build this iOS app? Both of us had native iOS experience in the background. We could have done that. But keep in mind, this is September 2015, React Native just came out. It was kind of the new shiny hot thing. Which is warning. It was untested and it was shiny, and so. But it was one of the choices. So we weighed it back and forth, and I think actually at one point in time, both of us said, okay. At the same time, we'll say what we want to do, native or mobile, or native or React Native, and we both said something completely different. So we're like, oh shoot. But ultimately, we decided on picking React Native. And two of the really big selling points for doing React Native, as we were kind of broadcasting our minds into the future of like today, of like how do we want to grow a business, and how do we want to have all of those engineers work together. And the idea of having to have JS for all the things was really attractive. All of our backend was JavaScript, all of our mobile or all of our web clients were JavaScript, and so to be able to translate that to mobile as well was really cool. So we said, okay, that's really a good idea. Let's kind of lean into that. But then there's also this concept of an over-the-air update, and this is really cool. This kind of looks like this. So on the left-hand side, I have my React Native app. It has a very thin native layer, which is where all the native bits live, and I have my big JavaScript file. And so the concept of an over-the-air update is while you have your running application, and this can happen in the middle of a user session, we can take the JavaScript that's running, throw it away, grab a new version, and swap it out. We can do it live. A user can be scrolling through their feed, and you're on the latest version. So we said, oh, that's really cool. Keep in mind, 2015, we had Apple at that time had a week-long delay if you wanted to push a new native update. So we were like, okay, we're both coming from the web world. Like we really like this idea, and so we really leaned into it. And then we kind of hit some snags. So the first idea, as you mentioned, was JS everything, and so we really bought into that heavy. And so heavy to in fact that we actually split up our repos and put all of the native side in one corner and all of our JavaScript side in one corner, and we just kind of forgot about that native layer. And we said, okay, nobody write code over there, everybody write code over here. If you have a problem, you must solve it with JavaScript. I mean, we obviously weren't that strict about it, but the idea was solve everything with JavaScript. And so to give one example on how that can go kind of poorly is, say you want to set up your crash reporting. Well, I can put a native API on the native side, and then as soon as my JavaScript boots up, the first thing it does is it calls in and says, okay, set up, here are the credentials, we're now recording for crashes. But a lot of work happened before you actually got to that point. You had all of your native modules, they all had to initialize, JavaScript core had to spin up, our file needed to be loaded, and then finally our crash reporting turns on. So if you had a crash anywhere between that, and we did, you just wouldn't know about it. And so we had a ton of crashes that we just had no idea. Another example is your analytics and reporting. So say you get a mixed push notification, you process that push notification on the native side and shove it down to the JavaScript, and the JavaScript will report to your analytics server and says, yep, I got a push notification. But what if it didn't process quite right on the native side? You'll never know because it never talked to your JavaScript. So there was this mental shift that happened where we really leaned into JavaScript, potentially a little bit too much. But over there, nothing can go wrong here. Nothing can go wrong by switching out your JavaScript context in the middle of a user session. This must be great. And to be fair, like, it can be. There were a lot of kinks in that we had to kind of work out. But I think the biggest one was this mental shift that we made that said, well, we can push bad code. We don't want to, but we could, because then we could always just do another push on top of that, and then it'll kind of cover it up. Or if it crashes, don't worry about it, we'll just roll back. And we kind of relied on that, maybe a little bit too much, to the point where testing kind of took a backseat. And so where did this lead? Too much JavaScript? Maybe, probably. Did we rely on rollbacks and rely on our code quality to come from this escape door back hatch? Maybe, I think so. So what happened in the end, or rather some of the big learnings stepping away from all of this, we have since stopped using over-the-air updates, and we're actually, Apple has gotten really good with how fast you can push a new update. It can be less than 6 hours. In practice, it's like a day. But it's actually really fast. But the first time we said, okay, well, what would happen if we stopped using over-the-air and just did a purely native app? He said, "Whoa, well, we have no escape hatch, so we gotta be really sure that we're not going to push any bugs." Yeah. Yes, we do. Yes. So that's what we did. We really leaned into our testing frameworks. We really made sure that the quality bar was very high before we pushed anything. And that was just a subtle mental shift that you can kind of like trap yourself with if you rely too heavily on your tools. And same with native. Once we got kind of past this hurdle of everything must be in JavaScript, and we were pushing native updates to the store very frequently, we said, oh, I guess we could probably do Sentry initialization when the app boots up. You're like, yeah, that's probably a better place for it. And I guess we could probably initialize our analytics as early as possible and start reporting some of these things. Like, yeah, that's probably a good idea too. So these are kind of like taking a step back. These are kind of like the two things that that if you see React Native out in the wild, they may be very attractive, but don't rely too heavily on them. And that's it. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Do any of the newer React Native tooling solutions, like one example would be Expo, solve any of the problems that you said that you ran into, like the test coverage or the analytics, for example?
Do I have to repeat the question? I don't know.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay, the question was, does Expo or any other the React Native tools out of the box kind of solve for this? The interesting thing about React Native is they're kind of their solution to iterating very heavily on creating a build very frequently is let's cut back the amount of code that goes into React Native and push back on the community and say, no, you guys build all these third-party modules. We're just going to do the rendering and maybe one or two other things. And so React is trying to take a step back and say, we're responsible for less, you're responsible for more, just so that they have a more sane build system. So that's where places like Expo kind of come into play, where they try to take over and add a really good layer. I haven't used Expo, but I've heard from anybody who's started React Native, they really like it. And potentially, but to be fair, I don't fully know how Expo works. So I would just say that like I think they push it back on you, but I'm not sure. Good question.
If you were to do it again, would you have gone native, or were there?
I was waiting for this question. I have probably talked to 3 people, and I'm pretty sure my first question is going to be, if I was going to do it again, would I pick React Native? So React Native. I was thinking of a variant of this question, which is when am I going to stop using React Native? So React Native serves our purpose right now really well. We are able to, just this last year, we had 40 engineers contribute to the code base. We had over 22 native deployments just in the last 12 months. So we are iterating very fast on our mobile app. And at the stage we're at right now, it makes a lot of sense. I think the point in which we step back and take a second look is when we're not able to hit our metrics anymore. And when we go up to them and say, hey, we need 4 nines for crash-free sessions, so 99.9%. And we turn around and look at React Native and say, well, the only ones left are coming from React Native, and those are in JavaScript core initialization. I don't think we can tackle those. Or performance issues, like we realized we were starting to hit a wall. As soon as we start hitting our ceilings, that's when we'll take a step back and say, maybe we need to reevaluate in order to hit our goals. But right now, they're working for us really well. Thank you. Yes?
What percentage of your code base is native versus JavaScript?
What percentage of the code base is native versus JavaScript? Native is probably less than 20%, I would say. The more native engineers that we're hiring, the more they're most comfortable over there. And so they're like, well, I'll just solve this with native. So maybe there's something we need to watch out there for as well. But yeah, probably about 20%.
What does the breakdown or profile of devices that Convoy targets look like, and how does React Native affect those?
What are the devices we target? Last time I checked, for Android, we have over 10,000 different devices out of the 12,000 that are out there today. So that's a lot. For iOS, it's just Apple products. It's so nice. I actually forget your question, but there are a lot of devices out there.
No, I guess my question is does React Native affect how you develop for older phones, etc.?
Yes, yeah, a lot of the older Android phones are a lot slower. React Native is kind of a hog, and so when it comes time to higher end devices, you don't notice the impact like hardly at all. But almost as soon as you start looking at mid-tier or lower tier, you notice, and then you really notice. So it's a big deal.
What kind of phones do truck drivers have?
Yes, so in the beginning, what kind of phones do truck drivers have? In the beginning, they were Galaxy S2s, 3s, and 4s, which are terrifying devices. Now, it's done a complete 180. Almost everybody has an iPhone X or like the biggest and baddest devices. So it's done a complete shift. I guess truck drivers really like having large devices to like stream YouTube and to like that's like their entertainment center.